no, Brandin Cooks can't feel it. I mean, I can't see that. I'm sorry. Listen, I got mad love for Brandin Cooks. I really, really do. But when you talk, what are we talking about here? We talking about Brandin Cooks replacing DeAndre Hopkins? DeAndre Hopkins is a future Hall of Famer. DeAndre Hopkins is one of the best receivers in the game and one of the best hands in the game. Brandin Cooks can ball. I'm not trying to talk about him like he's some scrub. The brother's got skills. He's got speed. He's made some big plays. But you know what? He ain't DeAndre Hopkins. He's not as reliable, and it's primarily because of his health. Concussions have been a problem for him. To me, if you didn't last with Drew Brees and you didn't last in L.A., it's hard for me to see how all of a sudden playing for Bill O'Brien is going to be a better thing for you. That's just me, but that's no knock against Brandin Cooks. He can play. It's just that I think DeAndre Hopkins is on an elite level, and he's just that special.
Brandin Cooks is very good when healthy. As you mentioned, he had the helmet-to-helmet last year, and it knocked him out of a couple of games, literally. And he was not last year what he'd been for the several seasons before that. And he's been traded a bunch, but reportedly that's not a reflection on the kind of teammate he is. He's considered a good teammate. And he says, I've been traded 3 times because I'm a desired commodity. He's not wrong about that. He's something less than a franchise-level #1 receiver, but something more than just a guy. Take the lid off a defense kind of guy, and he's quite good. So let's assume he's healthy for a second. Does he replace DeAndre Hopkins? No, because DeAndre Hopkins is not quite good. DeAndre Hopkins is great. He is going to go down in history. He's one of those receivers we will remember. Larry Fitzgerald, Chris Carter, like the hands guys. Oh my God, we'll be talking about him for generations because of that. He has special quality. So no, one player does not replace DeAndre Hopkins, but does it ease things? Does it make it better than it was? Sure it does. Even if, look, Bill O'Brien is an awful GM. Good coach, awful GM. And we'll see how good a coach he is, but an awful GM. He traded away DeAndre Hopkins, got almost nothing back for him when you include the contract he had to take back in David Johnson. And then he uses a pick where he could have gotten a comparable receiver maybe to Brandin Cooks in a very deep receiver draft. But would those guys be as ready to play this season as Brandin Cooks? Right? Like, let's leave aside how bad the deals were that Bill O'Brien, the GM, made, and let's look at what Bill O'Brien, the coach, can do with this guy. You know, sometimes, Stephen A., I'm not going to argue you're going to get better because you traded a better guy for a worse guy. But I will say that sometimes there's a tendency for a young quarterback to overly target his best receiver, right, instead of spreading it around. Deshaun Watson's becoming a more veteran quarterback. He's still ascending. And if he spreads the ball around with a guy who can really play like Brandin Cooks, Watson's ascension and that different kind of philosophy may keep them at least as good as they were or maybe even improve. That's not to say it was a good deal. I'm not saying Cooks is Hopkins or they wouldn't be better off with Hopkins, but they don't have Hopkins anymore. And the question is, does this make things better than it was before they lost Hopkins? The answer is it should. It really should. If Cooks can stay on the field, Cooks is a difference-making kind of receiver.
Well, listen, if we're at just strictly answering the question, can Brandin Cooks replace DeAndre Hopkins? Steve, no, you're right. Hell no. Hell no. I mean, we're talking about a guy in DeAndre Hopkins who over the last 3 years with Deshaun Watson averaged 105 catches, over 1,300 yards, and 10 touchdowns in those 3 seasons. That's a ton of productions. On top of that, you're talking about a guy who, for 20 games, Will Fuller missed 20 games in 3 seasons along that same span. So DeAndre Hopkins was still producing at a high level, even without his #2 guy, the guy who supposedly takes the top off the defense. So you're talking about elite level play at wide receiver. Brandin Cooks is not going to replace that. But I will say this, along the lines of what Max just brought up. If we think that Deshaun Watson is a superstar, and I think a lot of people would agree that he's entering that level of superstardom, then you would think that he's going to elevate people at their position. Now, Brandin Cooks is not a scrub. This is a guy over the last 3 years. He's had 2,000-yard receiving seasons. So the man can play ball. But all of this is predicated on Deshaun Watson taking another step in his development as a quarterback. And that's how I see this whole thing playing out. But just man for man, player for player, there's no comparison between DeAndre Hopkins and Brandin Cooks. No comparison.
Question for you, Woody. And I've asked this to other people that have come on the show that played in the NFL, covered the NFL, et cetera, et cetera. What kind of effect do you believe the coach has on offensive players, particularly the quarterback? Because I'm looking at Deshaun Watson, and he's obviously a stud, but I don't think Bill O'Brien has helped him here. And so when I look at it, I'm saying, excuse me, Brandin Cooks can't throw the ball to himself. You understand? Deshaun Watson's got to get it to him, but we're talking about everybody's looking at, okay, I'm not isolating on DeAndre Hopkins. So I've got a multitude of targets in Fuller and Brandin Cooks and Kenny Stills and these boys. My attitude is, but there's no one elite. They're good, but not elite. How is that going to make them better with Bill O'Brien? How do you answer that?
Well, I think that's the question. You know, everyone talks about Bill O'Brien. He's supposed to be this offensive guy, this offensive guru who's done wonder with quarterbacks, going back to his days as the head coach at Penn State. So to me, when you watch Deshaun Watson, he's gotten better and better every year. But the one thing that I can pinpoint about Deshaun Watson, he's gotten hit way too much, and they haven't had a stable rushing attack. Now, part of that is on Deshaun Watson, part of that is on Bill O'Brien. Why haven't you been able to get a stable rushing attack in Houston? Why is the quarterback getting hit a lot in his past 3 years? So I think Bill O'Brien, if he wants to maximize Deshaun Watson, he has to figure out, how do I get the ball out of his hands quicker so he doesn't take as many hits? And how can I get a more consistent ground game to help Deshaun Watson, maybe take the pressure off of him a little bit?
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN Plus.